I get a lot of specific questions in my DMs, so I picked this one to answer today because I feel like I haven't spoken about pregnancy of unknown location in a while. This is someone who had 3 IUIs on the 3rd try. They finally got pregnant, and they were pregnant up until about the 7-week mark. And she had something called a pregnancy of unknown location. So despite having a positive pregnancy test with rising HCG levels, that's the pregnancy hormone, they never saw the pregnancy develop in the uterus, and they called it a pregnancy of unknown location. And she said she's still processing it, and she feels like she doesn't fit into the miscarriage cohort. And there's a lot of, it sounds like, lack of closure and understanding of what actually happened. So I'm going to give my perspective of pregnancy of unknown location as a fertility specialist. So I know this is a confusing concept. How can the location of the pregnancy not be known? You're the expert. Shouldn't you guys know that? When you first find out that you're pregnant, this becomes apparent because your HCG level is positive, and it can be measured in your urine test. It can be measured on a blood test that will tell you the level of that pregnancy hormone. And we know that it should rise a certain amount. It should ideally double every 48 hours, but even a minimum rise of 53% over 48 hours in the early stage of pregnancy can be indicative of this being likely to be a viable pregnancy. Now, sometimes that level is not going to rise normally. It may plateau or be slow rising and kind of lingering and lagging behind where it should be, given when we think you ovulated or given when you had your IUI or your embryo transfer. In order to be able to actually visualize a pregnancy, a gestational sac and a yolk sac inside the uterus, technically your HCG level needs to rise above 1,000 if your ultrasound machine is pretty sensitive. But for most standard ultrasound machines, above 1,500 is the threshold for you to be able to actually expect to see something in the uterus. So as a fertility specialist, I'm tracking really early pregnancies, definitely before you would be able to see them in the uterus. So all of them are pregnancies of unknown location until we prove their location and give it time. If you have an early abnormal pregnancy and the beta HCG level is just not rising above that 1,000 or 1,500 threshold, you're unlikely to see anything on the ultrasound. And because the level is rising abnormally or very slowly, we want to err on the side of caution and say, hey, we need to presume this is an ectopic pregnancy. An ectopic is a specific location outside of the uterus that the pregnancy has implanted. Most commonly, this happens in either of the fallopian tubes, but it can be in the cervix. It could even be on the surface of the ovary. There's even more rare cases where you can find an abdominal ectopic, but most often they get stuck. The embryo has gotten stuck in the tube on the way to the uterus, and it's somehow been able to implant for some time and grow. And the danger there is that the fallopian tube is not where an embryo should be implanting and growing into a pregnancy. And so this can cause expansion of the tube to the point where it ruptures and leads to internal hemorrhage and bleeding. And this can be a major surgical emergency that needs prompt medical attention. Most ectopics, not all, will behave in a suspicious way where the HCG level is not rising normally. Often it might plateau, it might drop and then rise again. That's often a telltale sign. And so you have to wait and watch because you don't want to get to the point where someone has an ectopic in their tube and needs emergency surgery. If eventually it declares itself and you start to see a dilation in the fallopian tube, you normally can't see the fallopian tubes on ultrasound. So if you can see them and it looks like it's dilated and it's separate from the ovary, it's definitely not like an ovarian cyst. Sometimes you can even see structures associated with pregnancy, even a fetal heartbeat inside the ectopic. Now you know, and you can act on that. And you have medical ways to manage ectopics that can basically target stopping those cells from growing and dividing, and eventually it kind of just resolves. Or you can opt for surgery, and there's different criteria that determine what is the most appropriate management. But you're really just trying to get ahead of it and catch the ectopic. Now, a lot of pregnancy of unknown location are in reality not ectopic pregnancies. A lot of them can be just early abnormal pregnancies that tried to implant in the uterus and for whatever reason could not be sustained and continue developing normally. And so if you're told you have a pregnancy of unknown location, it means it's going to be a lot of monitoring, oversight, bringing you in for repeat blood work, trending your HCG levels, doing ultrasounds, and making sure that we don't see an ectopic. Sometimes the investigation goes beyond just doing repeat blood draws and monitoring with ultrasound. I have, on occasion, had patients with a pregnancy of unknown location that was behaving very suspiciously undergo a DNC where I'm basically disrupting any early abnormal intrauterine pregnancy that could be there and then checking the next day what are the HCG levels. And if they drop by more than 50%, we can presume this was in the uterus and now we're hastening this resolution process. But if they continue to rise after that, I'm going to intervene and often offer medical management for an ectopic pregnancy pregnancy with methotrexate, especially if we don't know exactly where the ectopic is. A lot of times, the HCG level is just going to slowly drop, and then this resolves on its own, and you'll never have any way of proving where the implantation actually was. But in the vast majority of these cases, like I said, this is probably an early intrauterine abnormal pregnancy. So for anyone who has faced this and feels a lack of closure, a lack of understanding of exactly what happened, know that this is considered like a miscarriage. This is a pregnancy loss. And I feel sad when I read, someone feels like they don't belong in a certain category or group. This is a valid loss, and you experienced all of the things that people who've had miscarriages go through, right? The initial excitement of a positive pregnancy test, and then, seeing that those levels decline and drop, and that this is not ending in the way that you wanted it to with a successful outcome. And that is devastating, and it's valid to have feelings of loss and grief associated with a pregnancy of unknown location, just like a confirmed intrauterine pregnancy that ends in miscarriage. I think there's an added layer when you have a pregnancy of unknown location, because there's also been this interval of stress and the unknown and being poked and prodded, because you need a lot more oversight and monitoring. It is definitely a challenging thing to go through, but the key is being informed and having a clear understanding of the plan and, what the possibilities are, the possible outcomes, and the things to look out for so that you can stay safe.